Jason Miller had spent the last 3 years of his life in the harshest environments imaginable. Sands that burned beneath his boots, the constant threat of danger, and the long nights under foreign skies. A decorated Army officer, he had given everything for his country, missing birthdays, anniversaries, and the simple moments of life that others took for granted. His family had been the anchor, the thing that kept him going through the longest days and darkest nights. He had endured and sacrificed, believing in the promise of homecoming, the promise that the end of his last tour would mark a new beginning. But when the plane landed at the base in California and Jason stepped onto the tarmac, he was hit with a wave of suffocating heat and a sense of loss. He had spent years fighting for his country, but what had he really been fighting for? The question echoed in his mind, but Jason was used to pushing doubts aside. It wasn't the first time he had questioned his place in the world, and it wouldn't be the last. He scanned the crowd of soldiers reuniting with their families, the joyful hugs, the laughter, the tears. His eyes searched for Olivia, his wife, whom he had been married to for 12 years, and their two children, Trevor and Amelia. He expected to see them at the front of the crowd, eagerly waiting for him. They had talked about this moment so many times. Olivia had sent him photos of the kids growing up, pictures of birthdays, school events, and summer vacations they had shared without him. Yet every time he saw them, he told himself that once he returned, everything would be fine. But as he stepped off the plane and into the heat, his stomach sank when he noticed something was off. Olivia wasn't there. There was no sign of her, no sign of the kids. He pulled out his phone, expecting a welcoming message or a reminder that she was on her way. Instead, his screen lit up with a text that would change everything. The message read, "Don't bother coming. The locks are changed. The kids don't want you. It's over." Jason's heart stopped. His thumb hovered over the screen, reading and rereading the words, unable to process them. For a moment, everything around him seemed to blur. The soldiers moving past him, the celebration, the joy of reunion, it all faded into a dull hum. His wife, his family, the people he had risked everything for, had turned their backs on him. The sting of betrayal was sharper than any wound he had ever sustained in battle. Why, Jason thought, the question hammering at his brain. What happened? His mind raced, trying to piece together the last few months. Their last video call, just 3 weeks ago, had seemed normal. Well, at least as normal as it could be with him halfway across the world. Olivia had been quiet during their conversations, but nothing had seemed unusual. Sure, there had been more tension in their discussions, more distance. The gap between them had widened over his last deployment, but he had convinced himself that it was just temporary. That when he came home, everything would return to normal. But now, standing alone in the blistering heat of Fort Benning, he understood the painful truth. Things were not normal. His marriage was over. His family was no longer his, and Olivia had already moved on. The raw emotions surged in Jason, but his training kicked in. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't give in to emotional reactions, not on the battlefield, and certainly not in their personal lives. He swallowed the hurt, compartmentalized it, and steadied his breath. He couldn't deal with this now, not in public, not at this moment. His training had taught him that the best way to approach a situation like this was to remain calm, calculated. He could process the emotional impact later. Right now, there was a mission to complete. Instead of responding to Olivia's text immediately, Jason allowed himself a moment of raw emotion. He squeezed his eyes shut, allowing the pain to wash over him. Then, just as quickly, he shut it out. He wasn't going to waste time wallowing. He had learned that much during his years as an Army Ranger. He didn't react. He planned. With a steady hand, he composed a single, measured response. "As you wish." The simplicity of the reply reflected the quiet but deadly precision that had made Jason so effective in combat. "As you wish" wasn't about submission. It was about control. It was about taking the reins of his life back, on his terms. After sending the message, Jason called Ethan Clark, his closest friend and fellow soldier. Ethan had been his confidant since they'd enlisted together. They had survived countless operations side by side, and now Ethan would help him deal with the personal battle that awaited him. Ethan, I need you to help me. I need to know everything about Olivia and what's been going on with her. I have to make sure I'm not missing anything. Ethan's voice came through the phone, calm but concerned. You got it, Jason. I'll dig into it and report back to you. I'll get you the information you need. Jason nodded, as if Ethan could see him. He didn't say another word. He trusted Ethan with his life, and now he needed him to help him uncover the truth behind Olivia's betrayal. Then Jason dialed Elizabeth Walker, one of the best divorce lawyers in California. Jason knew she had a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom, but that's exactly what he needed right now. He wasn't looking for a settlement. He was looking for a way to turn the tables on Olivia. He wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of their divorce. Elizabeth, I need your help, Jason said when she answered. This is urgent. Meet me at your office in 2 hours. I need a plan. You got it, Elizabeth replied without hesitation. I'll be ready. Jason hung up and looked out the cab window as he headed toward Elizabeth's office. His mind was racing. The betrayal still stung, but he had a job to do. This was no longer about saving his marriage. This was about justice, about making sure that Olivia didn't get away with this. He arrived at Elizabeth's office and walked in, determined and focused. The cool, professional atmosphere of her office mirrored his mindset. He would not let Olivia win. Elizabeth's sharp eyes scanned him as he sat down. Jason, I understand this is a difficult situation, but we need to approach this carefully. I assume you want to go after everything she has? Jason's reply was cold and direct. I want to win, but not for revenge. I need a plan that will secure my future, my kids' future, and take back what's mine. Elizabeth nodded, her demeanor unwavering. I'll help you do that. But first, I need all the details. We'll get you a legal edge and we'll use every asset you have. Jason's resolve was unshakable. He wasn't going to let this end with Olivia walking away with everything. It was time to take control of his own fate. Jason sat in the cab as it made its way through the crowded streets of downtown California. The sun had set and the city was coming to life. But Jason felt like he was floating in a fog. His thoughts were clouded by the recent betrayal. He couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. One minute, he was preparing to come home to his family, eager to reunite, and the next, he was faced with a cold, empty reality. One where his wife had decided to end their marriage without even a chance for him to explain himself. The pain was overwhelming, but Jason knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Olivia get away with this. Not without a fight. The last thing he would do was let her walk away unscathed. This was no longer about getting his marriage back. It was about justice, about ensuring his children weren't caught in the middle of a situation they didn't understand. When he arrived at Elizabeth Walker's office, a sleek, modern building in the heart of downtown, Jason felt the familiar rush of determination surge through him. He had been through countless dangerous situations in the military, but nothing had prepared him for the emotional toll that this betrayal would take. Yet he knew he had to compartmentalize, to remain focused on the task at hand. This wasn't about his emotions. It was about protecting his family. Elizabeth greeted him with a firm handshake, her sharp eyes studying him as he entered her office. She was dressed impeccably, her tailored suit giving off an air of professionalism and power. She was known for her no-nonsense approach, and that was exactly what Jason needed right now. I've reviewed everything, Elizabeth said, motioning for Jason to sit. Your wife clearly made a choice. But we're not here to dwell on that. We need to figure out how to play the hand we've been dealt. Jason took a deep breath. What do we do now? We need to build a case, Elizabeth replied, her voice calm but firm. You mentioned her affair with Preston Hayes. I assume you want to use that against her. Jason's jaw clenched at the mention of Preston's name. The thought of the man who had not only been cheating with his wife but had also attempted to replace him in every way possible made his blood boil. But Jason wasn't about to let his emotions cloud his judgment. This wasn't about revenge. It was about getting what was rightfully his and protecting his children. I want everything on Preston Hayes, Jason said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. I want to know who he is, what he's been doing, and how far this affair goes. I also want leverage. I want to secure my children's future." Elizabeth nodded, already pulling out a stack of papers. "I've got a few leads, but we need to move fast. I'll handle the legal aspects, but we need to make sure we have the evidence to back it up." "I don't care about her," Jason said, his voice low but intense. "I care about Trevor and Amelia. I need to make sure they're safe, and I need to make sure that she can't take them away from me." Elizabeth's expression softened just slightly. "I understand. And I'll make sure that happens. We'll get you what you need." For the next hour, they went over the details. Elizabeth outlined the legal maneuvers that would give Jason an edge in the divorce, and they discussed ways to secure full custody of his children. But Jason knew that it wasn't just the legal battle that would make the difference. It was the information. The truth about Olivia's affair with Preston Hayes, the manipulation, and the deceit. He needed to expose everything to the light. Before Jason left Elizabeth's office, she gave him a list of tasks. "I'll start digging into the finances. You'll need to start gathering information about Preston and Olivia's activities." "I'll have something for you in a few days." Jason nodded. "Thank you." As he stepped out of the office, his phone buzzed. It was Ethan. Jason didn't hesitate to pick up. "Got something for you," Ethan said. "Preston Hayes is dirty. I've got connections who've been tracking him. He's involved in shady real estate deals, and he's been playing this game for a long time. He's been using Olivia to get close to the family fortune." Jason clenched his fist. "I knew it. We need everything on him. I want his business dealings, his relationships, his assets." "Everything." Ethan's voice was grim. "I'll get you what you need. You just focus on getting the kids. We'll deal with Preston." Jason's heart ached at the thought of his children being involved in all of this, but he knew that he couldn't afford to waste any more time. He had to act now. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jason threw himself into gathering information, keeping his emotions tightly under control. He had been through countless missions in the army, each one more dangerous than the last, but none of them had prepared him for the sheer emotional devastation of what was unfolding in his personal life. The sense of betrayal, the knowledge that everything he had worked for and believed in was being torn apart by the woman he loved, it was almost too much to bear. But Jason was no stranger to pressure, and he knew how to handle it. Elizabeth had already started the legal work, moving quickly to ensure that Jason would have the upper hand in the divorce. She was relentless, using her vast knowledge of family law to her advantage. But for Jason, it was the personal investigation that would be the key to turning this situation around. He needed to know everything about Olivia's betrayal, every detail, every secret she had kept hidden. That's where Ethan Clark came in. Ethan had been Jason's best friend since they were kids, and after leaving the military, Ethan had gone into private security. He knew how to get results, no questions asked. Jason had been relying on him for years, and now Ethan's skills were going to be the lifeline Jason needed to expose the truth. Jason's phone buzzed, and he immediately picked it up. It was a message from Ethan. "Got something," it read. "Preston Hayes is more than just a lover. He's been in this game for years, using high-powered connections to manipulate women and families. I've got connections in the business world, and I've got eyes on him. He's clean on the surface, but it's all smoke and mirrors. I'll have more details soon." Jason's pulse quickened. He had suspected that Preston wasn't just some opportunistic lover, but the confirmation of it felt like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe that Olivia had been so blinded by her affair that she would risk everything for a man like that. Jason called Ethan immediately. "How far are you willing to go with this? I need everything. I need to know where he's been, who he's been with, and what he's really up to." "I'm on it," Ethan replied confidently. "I'll dig deeper, find out what he's hiding. But Jason, you need to prepare yourself. The man you're dealing with is dangerous." "I know," Jason said quietly. "I've seen what these kinds of people can do." Jason didn't have to wait long before Ethan had more answers. Late one evening, as Jason was sitting in his small apartment, he had decided not to go back to the house until he had concrete evidence. Ethan sent him a series of documents and photos. Jason opened the files with a calm but steady hand. The first page contained a list of Preston Hayes' business dealings. On the surface, they looked legitimate: real estate developments, property investments, and high-end commercial projects. But as Jason scrolled through the documents, he saw patterns that didn't sit right. There were discrepancies, transactions that didn't add up, and a few names that kept cropping up in places they shouldn't have been. But it wasn't just the business dealings that caught Jason's eye. Ethan had also managed to get his hands on a set of photos taken from hidden surveillance cameras. They were images of Preston meeting with Olivia, with a few other women in private settings, some in his office, others in high-end hotels. But what was most shocking to Jason was the final image. It was a photo of Preston standing at the doorway of his home, shaking hands with a man who looked eerily familiar. Jason's mind immediately flashed back to an encounter he had once had with a businessman who had tried to use Jason's military connections to further his own career. The man in the photo wasn't just any business associate, he was a player in a much bigger game, a game that involved more than just business. Jason sat back, processing the information. He felt the cold fury of realization spreading through his veins. Olivia had been manipulated, but it wasn't just about the affair. It was about something much bigger than that. A web of deceit, financial manipulation, and a plan to move in on everything Jason had worked for. He immediately called Ethan. "Ethan, I need you to get me everything on Preston. Not just the business stuff. Find out where he's really getting his money from. And get me information on his connections. I want to know who he's been talking to, who he's been working with. I need to know everything." "I'm on it," Ethan replied. "You're not dealing with just some random lover, Jason. This guy is the real deal. He's been playing this game for a long time. I'll get you the dirt." As Jason hung up the phone, he felt the weight of everything crashing down on him. His marriage, his family, everything was tangled in this mess. But there was no going back. Jason had known, even before he came home, that he couldn't just walk away from this. He had to make sure that Olivia and Preston paid for what they had done to him. He wasn't going to let them destroy his family, his life, without a fight. Jason's strategy was starting to take shape. The pieces were falling into place, but the hardest part was still ahead: confronting Olivia and Preston Hayes directly, exposing them for the betrayal that had torn his life apart. The sense of betrayal was still fresh, but Jason had learned long ago that there was no room for emotions in a fight. He had a mission, and it was time to execute. The documents and information Ethan had gathered were crucial. They painted a damning picture of Preston's operations and his manipulative tactics. What Jason had once thought was a mere affair had turned out to be part of a larger, more sinister scheme. Preston wasn't just after Olivia. He was after everything Jason had worked for. He had been carefully manipulating Olivia for months, using her insecurities and desires to pull her away from the life she had built with Jason. But what was even worse was that Preston was trying to replace him in every way possible. He was building a life with Olivia, a life that was now planning to move to Costa Rica, away from everything Jason had fought for: his children, his family, and his sense of purpose. Jason's mind kept going back to that final text message Olivia had sent him, telling him not to come home. It had been so final, so cold. But now, with the information he had, he understood the true nature of what was happening. Olivia hadn't just grown distant from him. She had been led astray, manipulated into a relationship that wasn't just about an affair. It was about control, money, and an escape from the life she had built with him. But Jason wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let Preston take everything from him. And he wasn't going to let Olivia destroy the family they had worked so hard to create. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming his dignity, his future, and most importantly, the future of his children. It was time to confront Preston directly. Jason called Elizabeth, his divorce attorney, and told her he was ready to meet. He had everything he needed now: the evidence, the leverage, and the resolve to finish this once and for all. "Elizabeth, I'm ready to make my move," Jason said, his voice cold with determination. "I've got the meeting set up," Elizabeth replied, her voice calm but assured. "We'll meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. Preston will be there with Olivia's lawyer." I've got all the documentation we need and we'll be ready to present it to them. Jason nodded, even though Elizabeth couldn't see him. This ends tomorrow. That night, Jason slept little. He spent hours preparing, reviewing the evidence, going over the steps in his mind. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. This was the most important thing he had ever done, not just for himself, but for his children. Everything hinged on what happened in that meeting. At exactly 9 a.m., Jason arrived at the meeting place. It was a high-rise building in the city center, the kind of place where high-powered lawyers and business people gathered to make deals. As he stepped off the elevator and into the conference room, Jason felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just there to fight for a divorce settlement, he was there to protect his family's future, and he wasn't going to leave without securing it. Olivia was already there, sitting across from him at the large conference table. She looked different, colder, more distant. Gone was the woman he had fallen in love with. In her place sat a woman who had betrayed him, who had chosen another man over her family. The hurt he had been feeling for weeks seemed to sharpen in the moment, but Jason didn't let it show. He had learned long ago that showing emotion in these situations only weakened his position. He wasn't there to argue with Olivia. He was there to get what was rightfully his. Preston Hayes walked in next, his usual confident, arrogant smile plastered on his face. He was tall, athletic, and dressed in a well-tailored suit, but despite his polished appearance, Jason saw right through him. He wasn't dealing with some charming businessman. He was dealing with a manipulator, a man who had no qualms about using others to get what he wanted. Preston had been playing the long game, and Jason had to admire the strategy, but Jason wasn't going to lose to him. Not now. Olivia's lawyer, a man named John Rutherford, followed shortly after. He was older, graying at the temples, and dressed in a dark suit that seemed to make him look even more imposing. He had the air of someone who had dealt with tough cases for years, someone who wasn't easily rattled, but Jason could tell that something was off. There was a tension in the room, something unspoken. The situation had gotten out of control for Preston and Olivia, and they knew it. Jason sat down, his posture rigid, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't here for small talk. He wasn't here to negotiate. This was a war, and he was prepared to win. John Rutherford looked at Jason with thinly veiled disdain. "Mr. Miller, I trust you've come to resolve this issue." "I've come to settle what's mine," Jason said, his voice low but confident. "I'm not here to discuss the affair." "That's already been made clear. What I want is for Preston Hayes to understand that he is not going to take my family, my children, or my future." Preston smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You can't stop this, Jason." "It's already happening." "Is it?" Jason's voice dropped, becoming cold. "I've done my research, Preston. I know about the fraudulent property deals, the manipulation, the money laundering. I know what you've been doing, and I know how far you're willing to go." The smile on Preston's face faltered for the briefest moment before he regained his composure. "You don't have the evidence to back this up." "Don't I?" Jason asked, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were the documents that Elizabeth had prepared, showing the full extent of Preston's financial schemes. "I've got all the proof I need, and I'm prepared to take it all the way to court." As Preston scanned the documents, the color drained from his face. He wasn't used to being caught off guard, but now he realized the walls were closing in. He glanced at Olivia, who was sitting silently, her face pale. She had been so sure of her new life, of the future she thought she was building with Preston. But now that life was crumbling before her eyes. Jason turned to Olivia, his gaze hardening. "You've lied to me, Olivia. You've lied to our children. And you've lied to yourself if you think this was ever going to end well." Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Her lawyer, John Rutherford, stepped in quickly, trying to regain control. "Let's focus on the financial settlement. We're here to resolve the divorce." But Jason wasn't done. He wasn't going to let Olivia or Preston get away with this, not without facing the consequences. He looked at Preston and then back at Olivia. "You will never take my children away from me. Not now, not ever. You'll have to go through me first." Jason could feel the tension in the room grow thicker with each passing second. The game had changed. What started as a simple fight for his marriage had now become something much larger. Olivia and Preston had underestimated him, thinking that his military background and stoic demeanor made him an easy target. But Jason was no longer just a soldier in the field. He was a father, a husband, and a man who had nothing left to lose. His plan was simple, but it was also devastatingly effective. He was going to make sure that Preston and Olivia felt the weight of their betrayal, not just in the courtroom, but in every aspect of their lives. Jason's eyes never left Preston as he sat across the table, his face a mask of smug confidence, but Jason could see the cracks beginning to show. The man who thought he could take everything from him was starting to realize that Jason wasn't someone to be trifled with. "Let's get one thing straight, Preston," Jason said, his voice cold and steady. "You thought you could take everything from me, but you've underestimated me. This isn't just about a divorce anymore. This is about my children's future, and I won't let you destroy their lives." Olivia remained silent, her gaze downcast, her expression filled with shame and regret. The woman who had once been his partner in life now seemed like a stranger. The love he once felt for her had turned into something unrecognizable, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the person she had become. But the anger was stronger, and that anger fueled his resolve. "I never wanted it to be like this," Olivia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you." "It just happened." Jason's expression hardened. "You don't get to say that to me. You made a choice. You chose him over us. You chose to lie to our children, to tear apart everything we built together, and now you're going to pay the price for that." Preston, who had been watching the exchange with growing frustration, leaned forward. "Enough, Jason. You can't keep playing this game. I've already won. Olivia is leaving you, and there's nothing you can do about it." Jason's eyes narrowed. "You think it's over? You think this is your victory? You don't know who you're dealing with." The air in the room was thick with tension, and Jason knew this was the moment that everything would either come crashing down or fall into place. His mind raced as he thought of the final pieces of his plan. He had prepared for every possible outcome, but he had one card left to play, the one card that would secure his children's future and expose Preston's manipulations once and for all. Elizabeth had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, digging into Preston's finances, following the paper trail, and collecting every shred of evidence that could be used against him. What they had uncovered was not just damning, it was lethal. Jason pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table toward Preston and Olivia. "You want to know what's really going on? You want to see how deep this goes? Take a look." Preston hesitated for a moment before opening the folder. His expression shifted from arrogance to confusion as he flipped through the documents. What he saw wasn't just a divorce settlement, it was the unraveling of everything he had worked for. The evidence was undeniable. Preston Hayes had been involved in multiple fraudulent real estate transactions, using Olivia's trust fund to finance his ventures. He had manipulated her into thinking he was a savior, someone who could offer her the life she thought she wanted. But in reality, Preston had been slowly sinking his claws into her, using her wealth to further his own ambitions. He had been planning to take everything from Jason, including his children. Olivia looked at the papers, her face paling as the truth hit her. "No, this can't be. What have I done?" Jason leaned forward, his voice low but full of authority. "You've been manipulated, Olivia, but it's too late for apologies now. The damage is done. And Preston, I'm going to make sure you never get your hands on my family's wealth." Preston's confidence had evaporated. He tried to mask his fear, but Jason could see it in his eyes. The man who had once been so sure of his victory was now a cornered animal, trying to figure out how to escape the inevitable. "I'll make a deal with you, Jason," Preston said, his voice shaky. "Let's just end this. We'll go our separate ways, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. You don't have to go through with this. Think of the children." Jason's lips curled into a smile. but there was no warmth in it. You think you can buy your way out of this? You think you can walk away without facing the consequences? That's not how this works. You've played your game, but now it's my turn. As Preston continued to stammer, trying to salvage whatever dignity he had left, Jason turned to Olivia. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with it. But I won't let you take my kids with you. I will fight for them, and I will make sure they have a stable, loving home. There was a long silence in the room, broken only by the sound of Preston's voice, which had become increasingly desperate. Please, Jason, don't do this. I was just trying to help her. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jason's expression remained hard. You were never trying to help her, Preston. You were using her, just like you've used every other woman in your life. And now, you're going to pay the price. Elizabeth stood up, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. We have everything we need to take you down, Preston. The evidence is clear. We're not just talking about a divorce anymore. We're talking about fraud, financial manipulation, and assault. Your little game is over. Olivia remained silent, her face now a mask of regret. She had been silent for so long, but Jason knew that her silence wasn't an excuse for what had happened. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Jason turned to face her one last time. You've destroyed everything, Olivia. But I won't let you destroy my children. This is where it ends, for good. The tension in the conference room was palpable as Preston and Olivia tried to grasp the full scale of the trap they had walked into. Jason could feel the weight of their realization. Their plans had crumbled, and there was no easy way out now. Every move they had made, every lie they had told, had led to this moment. But Jason wasn't done yet. He wasn't about to let them walk away with anything, especially not his children. Preston, clearly rattled, attempted to regain control of the situation. His earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, leaving behind a man grasping at straws. You can't do this, Jason. This is extortion. You're threatening everything I've worked for. Jason's voice was calm but lethal. You think I care about what you've worked for? This isn't about your money, your empire, or your manipulation. This is about my family, about my children, and you've crossed the line. As he spoke, he felt the weight of his words. The man who had once been part of his life, the woman who had once shared everything with him, were now nothing more than players in a game he had no interest in losing. It was a fight for the future, for the children who were caught in the middle, and for justice. Olivia remained silent, her face pale, her eyes avoiding Jason's gaze. The silence between them spoke volumes. She had known the consequences of her actions, had known them all along. She just hadn't cared enough to consider them until now. Jason turned to Elizabeth, his attorney, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the exchange. We need to move on this now. I want the full custody papers drawn up. I want it filed by tomorrow. Elizabeth nodded. Understood. I'll have everything prepared. We've got the leverage we need now, Jason. You've got them right where you want them. With that, Jason turned his attention back to Preston. You're going to lose everything, Preston. Not just the money, but your freedom, your life. And I will make sure that Olivia understands the full extent of your betrayal. Preston stood up, pushing back his chair in frustration. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes burned with anger. You think you've won? You think you have me cornered? You're nothing but a soldier trying to play a businessman's game. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Jason stood as well, not allowing the intimidation to affect him. You're right, I'm not a businessman. But I know how to fight, and I'm going to fight for what's mine, starting with my children. Olivia finally spoke, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with regret. Jason, please, you don't have to do this. This has gone too far. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jason's eyes flashed with anger, but his voice remained steady. You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to tear apart our family? To lie to our children? You made your choices, Olivia. Now you'll live with them. Her head dropped, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. She couldn't look him in the eye anymore. She had lost her way, and now it was too late for apologies. Jason didn't need to say anything more. The truth was evident. Preston and Olivia had lost. There was no way for them to come back from this. Preston had overestimated his ability to manipulate people and situations. He had thought he could charm his way out of anything, but now Jason had him cornered. Later that evening, Jason received a text from Wyatt. His old friend had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering information and surveillance on Preston's movements. The message was short, but it was enough to make Jason's pulse quicken. Preston's assets are frozen. We've got him. I'll send you the details. It's all over. Jason could feel the finality in the message. The game was over. The victory, though bittersweet, was his, and with it, his children's future was secured. The next morning, Jason and Elizabeth met with the judge. The legal proceedings went smoothly, and as Jason looked at the signed custody papers, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't just getting justice for himself. He was protecting his children from the emotional destruction Preston and Olivia had caused. Back at the office, Elizabeth reviewed the final documents. This is it, Jason. The divorce is finalized. The trust is protected. You've secured full custody. You've done what needed to be done. Jason nodded, but he wasn't celebrating. There was no joy in this victory, just a sense of finality. He'd won, yes, but at what cost? As he prepared to leave the office, his phone buzzed again. It was Olivia. The message was short. I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so lost. Please understand, this wasn't about you. Jason looked at the message for a long time before typing a response. I can't forgive you, Olivia, but I'll do what's best for the kids. That's all that matters now. He pressed send and put the phone down. It was over. The battle had been won, but the scars would remain. He wasn't going to let himself get caught in the past. His children needed him, and for the first time in months, Jason felt like he could move forward. As Jason left the building and walked to his car, the world outside felt strangely quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was free. Free from the lies. Free from the manipulation. And as he thought about the future, about the life he would build for himself and his children, he finally felt like he could breathe again. Jason's phone buzzed one more time. It was a simple message from Ethan. It's over. You've won. The mission is complete. Jason smiled to himself. The war was over. But the real challenge, the real mission, was just beginning. Jason stood in the courtroom, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table. The cold, sterile atmosphere of the legal proceedings had settled into his bones, but inside, his heart was still racing. This was the final showdown, the end of the road. He had done everything by the book, following every legal loophole and ensuring that his children's future was protected. But this was more than just a divorce settlement. This was about something deeper, something more personal. As the judge read the final ruling, Jason's mind wandered to the years he had spent with Olivia. The good times, the laughter, the dreams they once shared. Now those memories felt like distant echoes, far removed from the woman who had chosen to betray him in the worst way possible. But this wasn't just about him anymore. His children needed stability, and that's what he would give them, no matter the cost. Olivia was sitting across from him, her eyes red from days of crying, her lawyer by her side. But despite the tears and the remorse that seemed to flood her every expression, Jason couldn't find it in himself to feel sorry for her anymore. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The judge cleared her throat. I have reviewed the case thoroughly, and after careful consideration, I have decided that custody of the children will be awarded to Jason Harlow, with Olivia Harlow having visitation rights. The trust is to remain frozen until further investigation into the financial dealings involving Preston Hayes is complete. Jason felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but there was no joy in the moment. The victory felt hollow. This wasn't a win for him. It was the end of a chapter, a painful one, but a chapter that had been closed. As the judge banged her gavel, the room erupted into a quiet murmur. Olivia looked up at Jason, her eyes pleading, but Jason didn't respond. He didn't owe her anything. He had done his part, and now it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. Later that day, Jason received a call from Wyatt, his old friend and confidant. They had been through a lot together, and Wyatt had been with him every step of the way, providing support and helping with the surveillance of Preston Hayes. Now, as the legal battle was over, they had to figure out what came next. "How did it go?" Wyatt asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "We won," Jason replied, his tone flat. "Custody is mine, the trust is frozen, and Preston's assets are locked down. But I don't feel like I've won anything. It's over, Wyatt." "But the damage, it's done." Wyatt was silent for a moment, then spoke with a calm, measured voice. "Sometimes the battle isn't about the victory, Jason. It's about making sure you've done the right thing. You've done everything you could for the kids. That's what matters." Jason took a deep breath. "I know." "But what about Preston? What about him?" Wyatt chuckled lightly. "Don't worry about Preston. His time will come. He's not going to get away with what he's done. But you need to focus on your family now. The kids need you more than ever." Jason nodded, even though Wyatt couldn't see him. "I'm going to be there for them, every step of the way." As Jason hung up the phone, he took a moment to reflect. The anger he had felt towards Olivia and Preston was still there, but it was starting to fade. What he had done was more than just revenge. It was about protecting his children from the people who would have destroyed their lives for their own selfish desires. Olivia had made her choice, but Jason had chosen his kids, and no matter how difficult it was, that was all that mattered. That evening, Jason met with Trevor and Amelia, his children, at their new home. They had settled into the four-bedroom house that Jason had bought, a fresh start for the three of them. The kids had adjusted better than he had expected, though the emotional scars were still there. They had been through too much for anyone to expect them to heal overnight. "Hey, how's it going?" Jason asked, sitting down on the couch with Trevor and Amelia. They were watching TV, but the tension in the room was palpable. Trevor glanced at him, then quickly looked away. "I'm fine, Dad. Just getting used to everything." "I know it's been a lot," Jason said softly. "But we're in this together, okay? We'll figure it out." Amelia looked up from her book, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" Jason smiled, his heart aching for her innocence. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. I'm here for you both. I always will be." The days following the legal battle were spent rebuilding. Jason focused on spending as much time as possible with Trevor and Amelia. They went to the park, had movie nights, and tried to bring some normalcy back to their lives. But Jason knew it would take time for them to fully adjust. The emotional toll of the past few months had left scars that wouldn't fade easily. As for Olivia and Preston, Jason had no more room for them in his life. They were a part of his past, a chapter that had ended with betrayal and heartbreak. But he wasn't going to let them define him or his future. He had his children, and he was going to build a life for them that was full of love, stability, and the peace they deserved. A few weeks later, Jason received another call from Wyatt. This time, Wyatt had news about Preston. "Hey, I've got some good news," Wyatt said, his voice upbeat. "Preston is in hot water. The feds are investigating his real estate dealings. He's got multiple lawsuits pending, and the best part, they're going after him for everything. The scheme he's been running, it's about to come crashing down." Jason felt a surge of satisfaction at the news. Preston had finally gotten what was coming to him. The man who had tried to ruin his life, to take everything he had, was now facing the consequences of his greed and deceit. "Good," Jason said, his voice steady. "I'm glad to hear it." "He deserves everything he's getting," Wyatt chuckled. "I knew you'd like that. You did good, Jason. You protected your kids. That's what matters." Jason hung up the phone and looked out the window of his new home. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light across the yard. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. Olivia and Preston were out of his life for good, and his children were safe. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was closure, and it was enough. The days that followed were a blur. Jason had done everything he could to secure his children's future. The legal battle was over, and the results were clear. Olivia and Preston had lost. The court had ruled in his favor, granting him full custody of Trevor and Amelia, and for the first time in months, Jason felt like he could finally breathe. He had secured their future, and that was all that mattered. But the battle wasn't really over. Not for Jason. The wounds were still fresh, and the betrayal still stung. He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just about legal victories and financial settlements. This was about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and his relationship with his children. That evening, as Jason sat alone on his back porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. He had won, but there was no joy in victory. The weight of everything that had happened, the pain of losing Olivia, the betrayal by Preston, and the hurt caused to his children, lingered. But there was something else there too. A sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of relief that came from a battle well fought. It was the kind that came from knowing the storm had passed. The pieces were in place, and Jason had done his duty. Now it was time to rebuild. The next morning, Jason woke up early. The sun was barely rising, casting soft light through the window. Trevor and Amelia were still asleep in their rooms, and Jason took a moment to look out the window, thinking about everything he had been through. The last few months had been a whirlwind, but now he finally had a chance to put his life back together. He spent the morning working through plans for the future. He had a few things to sort out, moving into his new house, making sure Trevor and Amelia had everything they needed, and figuring out how to deal with the emotional scars that still lingered. But the most important thing was to make sure his children felt safe, loved, and secure. That was Jason's mission now. That afternoon, as the kids played in the backyard, Jason received a text from Wyatt. His old friend had been keeping tabs on Preston, and the news was exactly what Jason had been waiting for. Preston was about to face serious criminal charges, fraud, manipulation, and more. His financial empire was collapsing, and the truth about his dealings was coming to light. The FBI had launched a full investigation, and it wouldn't be long before Preston's world came crashing down. Jason felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him. Preston had tried to ruin his life, to take everything he held dear, and now he was paying the price for it. But that wasn't enough for Jason. Preston didn't just need to be exposed, he needed to be stopped for good. That evening, after a long day of making sure everything was in place for his children, Jason sat down with Wyatt at their favorite diner. Wyatt had been with him every step of the way, providing not just help with the investigation, but emotional support too. The two of them had been through a lot together, and tonight it felt like they were finally closing the door on this dark chapter. "So, what now?" Wyatt asked, sipping his coffee and looking across the table at his friend. "You've done everything you needed to. The kids are safe. Preston's done for. Olivia, well, she's out of the picture too. You've got the custody, the house, the future." Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. "I don't know, Wyatt. It doesn't feel like a win. I've done everything I can, but I still feel like there's something missing." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jason paused, thinking about his words. "It's just, after everything that's happened, the betrayal, the hurt, the lies, I'm not sure who I am anymore. I did what I had to do. I protected my kids. I made sure that they wouldn't be taken advantage of by those people. But where does that leave me?" Wyatt set his cup down and leaned forward. "It leaves you free, Jason. You've been fighting for your kids. You've been fighting for your family. And you won. It's not about getting back at Olivia or Preston. It's about what you do next. About moving forward." Jason took a deep breath, his gaze turning to the window. The world outside was moving on, just like it always did. He wasn't stuck in the past anymore. The mission was complete. But what came next? The next few weeks were a blur of new beginnings. Jason worked hard to create a stable home for Trevor and Amelia. They settled into their new house, a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood. The kids seemed to adjust, and though they still had moments of sadness, they were beginning to heal. They had their father, and that was all they needed. For the first time in months, Jason allowed himself to breathe. He spent time with Trevor, working on his lacrosse game, and helped Amelia with her homework. He even found time to meet with Vanessa, the recruiter he had met at the game a few weeks ago. They had coffee, talked about lacrosse, and for the first time since his world had been turned upside down, Jason felt a spark of possibility. The past had been painful, but it didn't have to define his future. He was ready for whatever came next. But the past was never truly gone. Olivia still contacted him, sending occasional texts with apologies, with regrets. She was still trying to salvage something, anything from the wreckage of their marriage, but Jason had moved on. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just done. One evening, as Jason was getting ready for bed, he received another message from Olivia. This time, it wasn't just an apology. It was a plea. "I've made a mistake. Please don't take the kids away from me. I need them. I need you." Jason stared at the message, feeling nothing but cold indifference. Olivia had made her choice. Preston had made his, and now it was time for him to move on. He had his children. He had his future, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Jason woke up to a bright, sunny day. He stood in front of the window, looking out at the new life he was building. The kids were safe, and the past was behind him. There was no more fighting, no more pain. And for the first time in months, Jason felt peace. The world felt different now. The weight that had hung over Jason for months, years even, had finally lifted. The battle had been long and draining, but he had come out on top. Olivia and Preston were out of his life for good, and his children were safe. The custody battle was behind him, and the financial manipulations that had threatened to tear his family apart had been exposed. But as Jason stood on the porch of his new home, watching his children play in the yard, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that lingered. This wasn't the way he had imagined his life would turn out. He had never wanted his marriage to end, never wanted to see his family torn apart. Yet here he was, standing alone in the silence of his new reality, his children running around the yard like everything was normal. Trevor and Amelia had adjusted well to their new home. The initial tension had eased, and the house was filled with the sounds of laughter again. Trevor, ever the teenager, had become more withdrawn, but Jason could see the change in him. He was healing. Amelia, on the other hand, had blossomed in a way that Jason hadn't expected. She had become more open, more engaged, and it made Jason's heart swell with pride. But despite the calm in the house, Jason felt a nagging discomfort. The world had shifted, but he wasn't sure if he had fully adjusted yet. Olivia's last message still echoed in his mind. The plea for forgiveness, the desperate words that made Jason's heart ache for the woman she used to be. But he knew the truth. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The kids were thriving. That was all that mattered. He had promised them that he would always be there, and he was. But he also knew that he had to find his own peace. His heart still carried the scars of the past, and while he had fought for his family, he couldn't ignore the fact that his own happiness was something he needed to rediscover. That evening, Jason sat in the living room, the quiet hum of the house around him. Trevor was in his room, probably playing video games, and Amelia was reading her favorite book in the corner. Jason looked at them both, his heart swelling with pride, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling inside of him. The battle was over. But now he had to find his way forward. As the night wore on, he found himself thinking back to the times he and Olivia had shared. The first time they met, their early days together, the love they once had. It all seemed so far away now. But he had to remind himself that it was gone. It wasn't coming back. What he had now was a new chapter. A new beginning. The phone buzzed beside him, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, seeing a message from Vanessa. "How are you holding up? I was thinking about you today." Jason stared at the screen for a moment before typing a response. "I'm good. I've got my kids, and that's all that matters. How are you?" The response came quickly. "I'm doing well. I know it's been a lot for you, but I just wanted to check in. Maybe we can talk soon, when you're ready." Jason smiled softly to himself, then set the phone down. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open up to someone else yet. He had just come through a storm, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to jump back into something new. But the idea of talking to someone who understood, who didn't have the baggage of his past, was appealing. He wasn't ready to rush into anything, but he knew he couldn't stay stuck in the past forever. The future was waiting for him. He just needed to find the strength to embrace it. The next day, Jason took the kids to the park. They spent the afternoon playing games, laughing, and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. For the first time in a long time, Jason felt like he could finally breathe. The weight of the past was still there, but it wasn't suffocating him anymore. As they headed home, Trevor turned to him, a serious look on his face. "Dad, I've been thinking about everything. I know things haven't been easy, but I think you're doing a good job. You're always there for us, and I appreciate it. I just want you to know that." Jason looked at his son, surprised by his maturity. He had been so focused on making sure Trevor and Amelia were okay that he hadn't fully realized how much they had been impacted by the divorce. "Thanks, Trevor. That means a lot to me." Trevor smiled, and for a moment Jason saw a glimpse of the young man his son was becoming. It filled him with a sense of pride, knowing that his son was learning to cope with the changes in his life. As Jason tucked the kids into bed that night, he felt a deep sense of peace. They were safe, they were loved, and despite everything that had happened, they were moving forward. So was he. He stood by the window looking out at the stars. It had been a long road, but he had made it. He had kept his promise to protect his children, to shield them from the storm, and now it was time to build something new, for them, for himself. As he closed his eyes, he felt a shift inside. Jason knew that there was still a long way to go. But he was ready. The battle was over. And now it was time for a new mission. One that didn't involve anger or revenge, but one of healing, growth, and a future that was his to create. Time had a funny way of healing, and for Jason, it seemed like the wounds that had cut the deepest were starting to close, slowly but surely. The months since the finalization of the divorce had given him a new sense of clarity. He had spent his life on missions, on battles, but now it was time for him to figure out his own path, not just as a soldier, but as a father, and maybe one day as something more. He spent countless hours with Trevor and Amelia, taking them to school, helping with homework, and spending quiet nights at home. Trevor was growing into a young man, learning to cope with the weight of their broken family, while Amelia was slowly finding herself again after everything that had happened. They were adjusting, and so was Jason. But there was always something more. Jason knew that. The yearning to feel whole again, the longing for a connection that wasn't just about survival. For so long, he had been focused on keeping the family together, protecting them from the chaos. But now, it was time to protect his own heart. The pieces of his life had been scattered, but now, with each passing day, he was starting to pick them up. The calls from Olivia had slowed, but she had not completely given up. She still tried, still sent messages, but Jason had learned to ignore them. She was part of his past, and he had to leave that behind. Preston, however, was a different matter. He was still around, still making noise in the background, but Jason had no intention of letting that man disrupt his newfound peace. Preston's schemes were crumbling, and it was only a matter of time before everything he had built fell apart. One Sunday afternoon, as Jason walked into the grocery store to pick up a few things, he ran into an old friend from his days in the military. Ben, a fellow veteran who had seen his share of battle and survived the horrors of war, was now working as a private security consultant. They hadn't seen each other in years, but it felt like no time had passed at all. "Jason, man, it's good to see you," Ben called out, his big grin lighting up the store. "Good to see you too, Ben," Jason replied, shaking his hand. They stood there for a few minutes catching up, exchanging stories about their time in the military and the transitions they had both gone through. But then, the conversation shifted to their personal lives. "So, how's life treating you?" "I heard about everything that went down with the wife." Jason took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair. "It's been tough, man, but I'm getting through it." Just trying to focus on my kids. They're the only thing that matters now. Ben nodded, his expression serious. I get it. Trust me, I know my divorce nearly broke me, but I came out the other side. You will too. It just takes time, Jason smiled wryly. I'm hoping that time is on my side. Ben chuckled. It will be. And hey, if you ever need to talk or just want a drink to clear your head, I'm here. We all need a break sometimes, right? Jason hesitated for a moment. He hadn't let himself relax in so long. The burden of being the strong, protective father, the man who held everything together, had been exhausting. Maybe it was time for him to let down his guard, even if just for a little while. Thanks, Ben. I might take you up on that offer. They exchanged numbers, and after a few more words, Jason left the store, the weight of the conversation lingering. He had been so focused on the fight, on the battle, that he hadn't thought about the aftermath. There was more to life than just surviving. There was peace to be found, and maybe, just maybe, Jason could find that again. A few weeks later, Jason found himself at a quiet bar sitting across from Ben. They were nursing beers, watching the game, and talking about old times. It felt good to just breathe, to let the weight of the past slip away, if only for a few hours. How's the family? Ben asked, his tone softening as he took a sip of his beer. They're doing well. Trevor is getting better. He's been opening up more, which is a relief. Amelia is, she's a little more distant, but I know she's still hurting. It's gonna take time. Ben nodded, understanding the pain that lingered beneath Jason's words. That's good to hear, man. I know it's hard, but just keep being there for them. It's the best thing you can do. Jason sighed, looking down at his beer. Yeah, I'm trying, but it's like I don't know who I am anymore. I've been so focused on everyone else that I haven't stopped to think about what I want, what I need. Ben leaned back in his chair, watching Jason carefully. You're not the only one, my friend. We're all trying to figure that out. But sometimes, you have to let go of the past to make room for the future. You've done what you needed to do. Now it's time to think about what's next. Jason thought about it for a moment. What came next? What did he want out of life? He hadn't really considered it. All he had done was survive, fight, and protect. But now he needed to find out what made him feel alive again, what gave him joy outside of the responsibilities that weighed on him. That night, as Jason walked home, he felt a shift within himself. The weight on his shoulders was still there, but it wasn't as heavy. The future wasn't so terrifying anymore. He was rebuilding, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. The next morning, as Jason prepared breakfast for Trevor and Amelia, he smiled. They were still healing, still adjusting, but they were moving forward. So was he. The past had shaped them all, but it didn't have to define their future. He wasn't just fighting for them anymore, he was fighting for himself, too. For the man he wanted to be, the battle was over, the fight was won. And now Jason was ready to live. The weeks that followed Jason's newfound sense of calm were far from ordinary. While things seemed stable at first, he couldn't escape the quiet whispers of his past that lingered. The echo of betrayal, the bitterness of his marriage's end, and the cold reality of Olivia's decisions still haunted him. But now, he was standing tall. His focus was on the future, not the wreckage left behind. Preston Hayes had become an afterthought. For weeks, Jason had let the law handle Preston's downfall. But now, as the days wore on, it became clear that Preston's schemes were more intricate than anyone had anticipated. His empire of lies was crumbling slowly, and Jason knew that Preston wasn't just going to disappear into the background. He would fight, and he would fight dirty. The investigation into Preston had only intensified. With the help of his lawyer, Leona, and some key allies in law enforcement, Jason had ensured that every legal move against Preston would land with surgical precision. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Jason received a call from Wyatt, his loyal friend, and the one person who had stood by his side through thick and thin. Jason, Wyatt's voice came through the phone, unusually tense. I've got something you need to hear. It's big. What's going on? Jason asked, his instincts kicking in. Preston is making a move. I don't know all the details, but I've been following some of his transactions. The man's got a plan, and it involves your kids. A chill ran down Jason's spine. Preston had always had an uncanny ability to manipulate situations. For a moment, Jason couldn't breathe. The idea that Preston might try to use his children as pawns again was unacceptable. What kind of move? Jason growled, his voice icy. I don't have all the info yet, but he's involved in some shady real estate deals down in Costa Rica. Your kids are part of it somehow, probably something to do with the trust funds. You need to be careful. Jason ran his fingers through his hair. I'm not going to let him use my kids for leverage. You'll hear from me soon, Wyatt. I need all the details. Within hours, Jason and Leona were sitting across from each other in a sleek downtown office. Leona had made it clear that they were not just up against a businessman. Preston was now operating in the shadows, and he was ruthless. Leona had a knack for handling such characters, but even she seemed a little more wary than usual. This is bigger than we thought, Leona said, flipping through a set of documents. There are multiple properties involved, not just one. This could be a money laundering operation. Preston has tied these deals to shell companies all over the place. Jason felt his blood pressure rise. And my kids? The trust fund has been restructured. Olivia signed some papers recently, without your knowledge, of course, and the properties that are involved were transferred to Preston's shell companies. There's also something about them wanting to move to Costa Rica and settle there permanently. Jason's mind raced. The realization hit him hard. Preston wasn't just trying to take his family's money. He was trying to take his children, too. The thought was more than just unsettling. It was a violation of everything Jason had worked for. They won't get away with this, Jason said firmly. I'm going after him. We'll stop him before he can even think about taking my kids anywhere. Leona nodded, her expression determined. We'll hit him hard. He won't expect it. By the time Jason arrived home that evening, he had already made up his mind. The battle was far from over. Preston might have thought he had won, but Jason was ready to fight back with everything he had. His children were safe. No matter what it took, he was going to make sure Preston couldn't steal their future. The next day, Jason took Trevor and Amelia to lunch. He needed to have a conversation with them, one that he had been avoiding for a while. He wasn't sure how to explain what was going on, but they had to know. After they finished eating, Jason sat them down in the car. I need to talk to you both about something important, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. There's been some stuff going on with your mom and Preston, stuff that I don't want you to worry about, but it's important you know what's happening. Preston is trying to get to you guys again, through some legal loopholes. I'm not going to let that happen. Trevor frowned, clearly confused. What do you mean? What's he going to do? I don't know exactly, Jason replied, but he's trying to take you guys away, manipulate the trust fund, and use it to control your future. He wants to make you part of his plan, but I'm not going to let that happen. The silence in the car was thick. Amelia spoke up first, her voice small but full of conviction. You're going to stop him, right, Dad? Absolutely, Jason said firmly. I'm going to protect you, always. That night, as Jason went over the new evidence with Leona, a sense of urgency built within him. They were closing in on Preston, and the final blow was imminent. The next phase of their plan would begin tomorrow at dawn. But even as Jason prepared to make his move, something told him this would be his hardest battle yet. Not because of the legal maneuvering, but because it was a fight for the hearts and minds of his children. He wasn't just fighting for his family's fortune or for his own dignity. He was fighting for their future. And he wouldn't back down, no matter what. The sun had barely risen when Jason stepped into his car, his mind focused and sharp. Today would be the day he would take back control. Preston had made his move, thinking he had outsmarted Jason at every turn. But Jason had something far more powerful than Preston ever imagined: the truth. As Jason pulled up to Leona's office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Wyatt. Everything is in place. We move in 1 hour. Be ready. Jason texted back quickly. I'm ready. Inside the sleek, intimidating office of Leona Fisk, Jason took a deep breath. He had gone over the plan 1,000 times, but this moment felt different. This was it. Preston was cornered now. The evidence they had gathered, Preston's financial misdeeds, his manipulative real estate schemes, and the conversations with Olivia that were now a matter of public record, was enough to bury him for good. Leona looked up at him, her sharp eyes reading him with the intensity of someone who had been in the legal trenches far longer than he had. "We'll make the call in 30 minutes, she said, her voice calm but with a certain edge to it. "Let's do this," Jason replied. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back what was his kids, his life, and his future. An hour later, Jason found himself sitting across from Preston at a conference table in a high-end downtown building. Preston, wearing his usual mask of arrogance, gave Jason a tight smile as he sat down, flanked by his two lawyers. He looked like a man who thought he had the upper hand, but Jason knew something he didn't. Preston was about to lose everything. "Jason," Preston greeted him, leaning back in his chair. His voice was smooth, confident. "I must admit, I thought you'd be a little more upset by how everything turned out." Jason stared at him, unwavering. "What's upsetting is the way you've been playing with my kids' lives." Preston laughed, though it was tight and nervous. "Your kids will be fine. They're better off with me and Olivia. I'll provide them with the life they deserve, something you could never give them." Jason leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're right about one thing. You never had a chance to take anything from me. But now it's over." With that, Leona slid a folder across the table. Preston picked it up, flipping it open with a hint of curiosity. Jason watched as the smile on Preston's face slowly faded. The folder contained everything Preston had tried so hard to hide. Preston's secret dealings, the fraudulent real estate investments, the money that had been funneled into his shell companies, and most importantly, the documents that proved his involvement in Olivia's financial manipulation. Preston flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with every turn. "Where did you get this?" he hissed. "I've been watching you, Preston," Jason said, his voice icy. "I've known exactly what you were up to. I just needed the right time to make my move." Before Preston could respond, Leona spoke up, her voice sharp. "These documents are a clear violation of financial law. And these?" She pointed to the photos of Preston with Olivia, their relationship far more than just a business partnership. "We've already submitted these to the authorities." "Preston, you're done." Preston looked up at Jason, the confidence completely gone from his expression. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. "You can't do this. If you go to the cops with this, you'll ruin Olivia. She'll never get the kids back." Jason paused for a moment, letting the weight of Preston's words sink in. Then he spoke with the cold finality of someone who had been through enough pain. "Olivia made her choices. You made yours. I'm not going to let you destroy my family. But I am going to make sure you pay for everything you've done." The next hour was a blur of legal exchanges. Preston's lawyers scrambled, making calls, trying to pull whatever strings they could, but Jason was in control now. Leona had expertly negotiated every angle, ensuring Preston would face the consequences of his actions. When the meeting ended, Preston and his legal team were escorted out, and Jason found himself alone in the conference room with Leona. "Good job," Jason said quietly. "We did it." Leona smiled, her eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. "You did it, Jason. You fought for your kids. You won." Later that evening, as Jason returned home, he found Trevor and Amelia sitting on the couch, watching TV. He sat down beside them, his heart light for the first time in a long while. "Dad, is everything okay?" Trevor asked, glancing at him. Jason nodded, smiling. "Yeah, kiddo. Everything's going to be just fine now. We're safe. You and Amelia are safe." Amelia looked up at him, her eyes still holding some of the hurt from the past months. "What happened to Preston?" "Is he gone for good?" Jason nodded again. "Yeah, he's done. Everything he tried to do to us. It's over." Trevor grinned. "You beat him, huh? I knew you would." Jason chuckled, ruffling Trevor's hair. "I didn't just beat him, son. I made sure he couldn't hurt us again." That night, Jason sat on the porch, looking out at the stars. The past was behind him. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. Olivia and Preston were out of his life. His kids were safe. And though he knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, Jason had come out of the storm stronger. He had rebuilt his life step by step, and now he was ready for whatever came next. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about moving forward, living his life on his terms with the people who mattered most.